Hello, I'm Dr. Leah Cox, Vice Provost for Equity and Inclusion and Chief Diversity Officer for the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. I'm a tall, brown-skinned African-American woman with gray hair, and I'm wearing a blue shirt with a blue and silver necklace. I'm delighted to be a part of this conference for multiple reasons. I'm also impressed with the focus and energy that is given to the use and understanding of technologies for deaf and hard of hearing community by numerous employers who are showcased at the conference. I appreciate and thank them for their continued support. However, even today in 2021, members of the community are still experiencing inequities when it comes to technology. This includes Black, Indigenous people of color, BIPOC. I am specifically speaking about racism and autism. It is not just about changing policies or usage. It's about understanding and talking about racism, autism, and discrimination against members of oppressed identities. It is understanding that the systems were not always thoughtfully designed to enhance the lives and usage of those members of the BIPOC and deaf and hard of hearing communities. It is about the engineers, data scientists, employers, CEOs, and others who are not talking about the issues of race, racism, autism, and discrimination. So let me start by defining racism so that we have clarity on how it affects all of us, not just people of color. Racism is the belief in a hierarchy of human value. Racism often refers to individuals or groups targeted for negative treatment due to the color of their skin or other group-based characteristics. This could be skin color, hair texture, and facial structural features. Racism occurs when a group is actively engaging in behaviors that target others because of the way they look. It is the belief that some people are just not worth more than others. Moreover, this does not just affect the people who are initially targeted about the effects, but the effects continue for generations after the initial targeting. Humans are linked in multiple ways. However, at some point, when we operate under a system where race is a measure for hierarchy, someone will end up on the bottom. Similarly, the definition for autism is the belief in a hierarchy in human value based on the belief that those with hearing are superior or normal. Deaf and hard of hearing individuals experience autism and discrimination operating under systems that do not take into consideration the laws and basic human rights for equity. To begin to make progress on the idea of resetting and reconnecting, we must first recognize that we live in a racist society. And as Angela Davis once said, it is not enough to be non-racist. We must be anti-racist. This means actively dismantling the systems that some folks actually benefit from every day. While you may not know it or think about it, it exists. It exists and is built into the structure of our country and our way of life. To say that you are non-racist is passive. To be an anti-racist is always active. You are actively working to review policies and procedures and inequities in a system that values one group of humans over another. It must become a habit you practice every day with intentionality. It takes courage to deal with issues of privilege and power, and to sit in this discomfort of the conversations that must take place. When you see something, you say something. You continue to work to dismantle injustice. I've noticed that often members of our government and some businesses support the idea that if we can solve economic inequities, then racial inequities will just go away. However, I believe that we cannot solve economic inequalities until we solve racism in our country. We must begin by looking at the institution of racism. We must look at systems and structures, not just individuals. The term institutional racism, first used in the book Black Power by Stokely Carmichael and Charles Hamilton, which says, institutional racism is not so easy to identify because it's more subtle. Some of the institutional racism that we know and have known to exist begins with the enslavement of Black people, Jim Crow laws, redlining, healthcare disparities, and separate but equal educational systems. All of these are examples of systemic racism. Separating people by putting them in an inferior class and then engaging in practices that perpetuate racial inequities. In understanding inequities, deaf and hard of hearing individuals have endured discrimination and exclusion in multiple ways as they are judged by their ableism and often skin color. Deaf and hard of hearing individuals experience environments that endanger their lives, deny them equal access to education, healthcare, and work opportunities. Even as we celebrated the anniversary of the ADA American with Disabilities Act, the number of people still experiencing autism is surprising, and those who are still enabling and developing racist policies still exist. Additionally, Black and brown deaf individuals experience both racism and autism in the deaf community. Racism and autism is the double hit for those members of the community. They are rarely safe havens for these individuals. Their struggle to fit in or compete for an already inequitable system creates a bigger challenge. So what about the engagement in the field of technology? Let us talk about some of the ways that technology continues to systematically engage and perpetuate these inequities. 1. Those who are involved with technology, data scientists, engineers, and those who market and sell technology must embrace a new way of thinking, actively engaging in recognizing how race historically and presently plays a part in the work that you do. To ignore this perpetuates the current systems as they exist. For example, looking at the mortgage lending systems built to lessen bias by not doing face-to-face lending. However, this actually resulted in charging Black and brown people higher rates for lending. The algorithms created focused on maximizing price. They did not take into account the racial discrimination against Black and brown people and the housing and lending markets such as redlining, predatory lending, and blockbusting. If those who are developing the algorithms and technological systems are unaware of the racial inequities that exist, they cannot design systems that do not continue to perpetuate them. Therefore, it is about educating yourselves about race and racism, actively engaging in the education and discussion around these issues. 2, think critically. What are we asking technology to solve? Charlton McWayne, in his book Black Software, the Internet and Racial Justice, From the Afronet to Black Lives Matter, wrote, if we don't want our technology to be used to perpetuate racism, then we must make sure that we don't conflate social issues like crime or violence or disease or delinquency and the like with Black and brown people. He also said, when we do that, we risk turning those people into the problems that we deploy our technology to solve, the threat we designed it to eradicate. We need to consider asking questions that are more powerful. Can we use technology to look at debiasing the system? Can we look at race and racism through a different lens? An unbiased lens that promotes equity, utilizing all of the information available regarding the inequities of racism to make sure that we are not repeating what currently exists. For example, do not ask how technology can address crime. What we end up with is predictive policing, facial recognition, and risk scoring systems, all which actually target Black and brown people. Think about the questions needed to develop the technology that creates equity and addresses social justice with an understanding and conversation about race and racism. We need to ask the questions about who is being left out of the conversation, activity, or being discriminated against. Determine if new technologies can help those who do not identify as deaf or hard of hearing. 3, think about who is encouraged to enroll in STEM classes starting in high school. Statistical data still informs us that Black and brown students are not encouraged to participate in STEM courses. That Black and brown deaf students are still pushed to vocational tracks in our high school. There must continue to be a push to increase the participation of deaf and hard of hearing individuals to be a part of the development of technologies that will help not only the deaf community, but those who are a part of the Black deaf and brown deaf community. So what are we called to do is to begin by understanding what racism is. And then first, and most importantly, is to identify any racial inequities. For many of us, it is important that we understand autism and then add your understanding of autism while also using your understanding of racism and how the intersection of these two identities can create insurmountable challenges. Racism can target many groups of people with multiple identities. If you believe that Black men are superior to Black women, then you'll not recognize the inequitable policies that will target Black women. The intersection of race and other identities such as gender, sexuality, and ethnicity means you must use an intersectional approach to becoming anti-racist. And then ask yourself, what are you doing to recognize, identify, call out, and change? It is important to use your power whenever possible to make changes, call out inequities, highlight inequitable policies and procedures. Remaining ignorant about these issues or declining to change policies that produce disparities is not an option for someone who wants to be anti-racist. It is not an option for those who recognize that each of us can make a difference. Thank you.